So this is going to be a pretty fun process. See, I've already got started here. Got the caliper removed, strung up out of the way. I've got this bolt loose, so the spring is free to fall down when we get the rest of this assembly down. All we're doing now is the big nut on the back of that radius arm, which I just got to break loose, which is super special because all this stuff is a little old. And underneath this way, at the other end of this big I-beam guy, we're taking that nut and bolt loose to drop this completely out of the truck frame, just like we did on the crash repair. But I have to let you know that I was extra super shocked while I was taking super shocked while I was taking stuff apart. You notice how this isn't cut? That nut actually came loose and unthreaded without me having to put vice grips on it or anything, and it just was really nice and smooth. And the last person to put shocks on this truck was my dad, which was about 20 years ago. So that was pretty neat that came loose. Anywho, now we're going to move forward. I just got that nut broke loose, so now we get to go under and get that stuff loose, and then we can set this down. Now we're down here underneath the truck, follow the I-beam, here to the other end. See, this side is the bolt that stabs through the guy. That's a really nice looking 40-year-old bushing. That's probably fine. Back here on the back side, see all this dirt and crud and nasty stuff. We're gonna get in here with our wire brush. Yeah, you really see that. With our wire brush and clean all that up. Spray it down with some more of the blaster again, and then we'll start trying to break that nut loose. Alright, you may be able to tell there was just a little bit of dirt on that. It's like 2 sizes smaller now. I didn't give you guys a good visual earlier. This is the back side of that Kingpin, bushing down here, bushing up there. You see how this is the pivot point for the steering knuckle, and this needs to be like really tight in here, that way when you're going over bumps and stuff the suspension moves up and down, this doesn't wiggle. But this is what this one does. See, the top almost stays in place a little bit, but that bottom though, holy, and I'm sure the top moves a little when you have the 5,000 pounds of the truck on it. But yeah, there you go, so you can see. That's why it's dangerous. I got my other jack out from underneath here, got my little jack down there, and see we got it dropped down, the spring's loose up top for the first time in forever. Now we're gonna get under there and do my jack trick again, because this nut is really tight back up that way, but I got it where I can put a wrench on it, and then we're going to put the big jack under the wrench and just hydraulically loosen it. So we got that bolt all broke loose and taken off, but we put the nut back on because I'm not taking that end of the I-beam out quite yet. Right here you see I got my shiny new breaker bar and this 1 1/8 inch socket here on this nut that I've just been soaking in the PV blaster. There's a bolt, you probably know, there's a bolt that goes through this guy, through the I-beam and this radius arm, and then up above here there's like a nut that caps this stuff together, and then there's this little saddle thing that this spring sits on, and then there's another little spring seaty guy That's preventing this from falling off. And then there's the nut that we're on right now. It's a lot easier to take those two nuts out if you keep this apparatus, that bolt in there and this stuck in there, because that'll hold it from turning for you. And then you can put both of your hands on the twisty feller. So, yep, there you go. That's a good tip. Now I'm gonna struggle with this for a while, and I'll show you what it looks like when we get that off. Well, that sure is just an exciting thought, putting better springs on this old truck. 'Cause this thing, she's been around a long time, and just, woo, flames around the Mustang horse, and just been, I wouldn't say neglected, but it's been like 6 years, maybe 6, 7. It's been a long time since this thing was like the daily driver, like it's about to be again. Anyway, over here, now that we have the old spring, and down there there's a washer and the nut out the way. Right here is this plastic ring guy. This is important, don't throw that away. Oh my god, a bug. Shop's infested. But without that, your spring will sit straight on metal, and then it's metal on the metals, and your ride will be squeaky with the bumps. But now this lifts out of the way. We'll be giving all this stuff a really good clean. Down here is the next nut we need to take loose, on account of it's holding the radius arm onto the guy. And then after that stuff's loose, I'll show you what we need to do over here before we go pushing on it with the press. Alright, now we have a rather large, much better looking than you would expect for being in there for 40 years, bolt taken out of the way. How I did that, because the nut was down here and the bolt was really long to accommodate the rest of our suspension stuff, I put a crescent wrench, on account of me not having a 1 1/8 inch wrench, up here where it like jammed in this way, and I just turned the whole bolt from down here with a socket and big breaker bar and all that, instead of having to try to turn on the crescent wrench. But after working on that for a half hour, we got it all loose, and our threads are nice and clean now. Ran a bolt off of it twice already. Now we can come back in here, take that bolt all the way out, she'll drop down, and we can take this bolt all the way out, she'll drop down, and this should just slide right apart now. Then after we have this guy all out by itself, we can take this outside and get to cleaning up on all this really good before we go popping these caps off. Now that we've got our I-beam steering knuckle assembly cleaned up a little bit, and up here on the bench we're gonna remove this cap, and down here on the bottom side there's another cap with a grease fitting in it. Gonna unscrew both of those, and right in here there's this little big pin looking guy. There's a nut you remove from the other side here, see the bolt, and then we'll drive that out. That is like a big giant keyway. It's like a big giant key in the center of your kingpin in here, stopping it from going up or down. Now I've got this first cap removed here at the top, and if you'll notice, there's a bunch of material in here. That's all like shavings from the Kingpin and what's left of the bushing. You might be able to tell, but see, there's this metal, and down inside here there's another thin piece of metal. That's the bushing, and if I pick up and down on this, you can see how much it moves up and down and in and out. That bushing needs to be really tight around that big pin. And yeah, I think you can see. It's not tight. Anywho, now I'll go drive this pin out, take the other cap off, and we'll situate on the press that I don't think I've showed you guys yet in the other update video. Had this here since the old lady's car accident. We'll lower that deck down and try to get situated, figure out a piece of something to go between this pushy arm here and right there, because we need to push on that. It's loosely in the steering knuckle, but super tight in this area. Well, this is about the most horrifying thing I've ever done in the shop so far. But if you'll see my setup down here, I got my blocks turned up extra scary ways, and the steering knuckle is supported hurty straight like. I need to invest in some better pressing tools, but I got this here bolt out of the old I-beam from when we wrecked the 92 here. This is a pretty good pressing tool though. The only thing depressing about it is it's so long, so as you can imagine, that's sketchy, having that much length between the press and what you're pushing on. But I haven't even broke the heat out yet. I've just sprayed a bunch of the blaster, and I've pushed down pretty hard and let off and reset a few times, and our pin has just moved significantly down. And I've had this like torqued up a good bit here a second and haven't made no progress, but just now it sounded like a friggin' gunshot. The pin just shot straight down, like see here in the bottom. This block's blocking it from coming out, so I gotta reset some things. But there was a big air space between the end of the pin and the end of the steering knuckle, like you see here, and it just down and contacted with that really hard, really fast. I mean, like, it let go and just really scared me where I pee. Years that pin's been in place there. Now we finally separated the steering knuckle from the I-beam. Next we get to push out the bushings out of the steering knuckle. So this right here is a piece of residential grade chain link top rail. And see, this is the swedge in made to fit into the back side of another piece of rail to continue down a fence line. Anywho, as it turns out, that swedge end is the perfect size to fit just inside of this hole here to push on the bushing in there. And definitely not appropriate press material, because this will just crush before you can put much pressure on it. But check that out. If you can see, it's moving. I think either that or it's crushing down there. It looks like she is pushing that bushing right on out of the way for me. Sweet. And it's only crushing the pipe a little bit. Nice. So yeah, oh, see, there it comes out the bottom. That's more fence man mechanicking for you. Here you go. There's my old chewed up bushing. Hopefully it looks the same as this one. I don't think so. That's probably, we'll go out on a limb here and say there's an issue here with my new hardware. So that should be fun. Then again, these do get reamed out, so maybe that's right. I don't know. Wow. Hey, Muffin. It's a little dark under there, but there's no holding up the tire bits. Got the passenger side completely disassembled. My bolt was really stuck here that held the radius arm on, so I had to bring that whole heavy contraption over and push that out with the press, but that was cool. Now we're doing the other Kingpin. See, we're all set up with our big bolt, but I added a safety feature this time because I had once last time this whole operation flipped over and the bolt just took off across the shop. So this time I tied a little steel cable to it. So that'll be my bolt holding on 500, and hopefully it won't take off and fly into you if things go wobbly and fall over. Sweet. You good? All right. Now it came loose. Whew. Now I come down here and rearrange my block where it's over to the edge so the pin can slide past and push it the rest of the way out, which should be a little less scary because it's finally moved for the first time in all that time. Alright, making more progress. See, here's the passenger side I-beam all taken loose from everything, and this one also had a whole bunch of play from this pivot bushing. See, I just put in the new one on this side, and this is what came out when I took it off. This was pressed into the I-beam, but all this just fell right out of it when I took it out of the truck. So this guy was just slopping all over the place. Here's the driver's side one. It's pretty worn, not near as bad as the passenger side was, but it's pretty worn and ugly. So that's going to be a nice upgrade to have the new pivot bushings. Only like 25 bucks too to get good ones. You can spend $10 and get cheap ones. Might as well get the moves. Moop. Now we have our new Kingpin bushings pressed in place, and then we took the steering knuckles to a machine shop, and they have the hone, or whatever it's called, the reamer tool, to stick down through here. It's a long guy, does both bushings at the same time, so everybody's straight and true. And now our kingpins fit in place, but not too much, just so they're nice and smooth, but no extra wobble and play to start out with. Now I've got my stuff laid out to make sure I don't mess up when I'm putting it all back together. See, I labeled everything, but the driver's side I-beam here is quite a bit longer than the passenger side I-beam. You want to make sure you don't get your steering knuckles mixed up or upside down. See, when you lay your stuff out like so, the I-beam has this stop on the back side of both of them, so your little stoppy guys will be facing backwards, and the longer ones on the driver's side. That way you're not looking at this thing upside down. And then you know you need the steering knuckle on this side that has the brake guy facing backwards and the steering guy facing forward, because our drag links are in the front. And then you won't get your steering knuckles mixed up backwards and press all this stuff together to have to press it back apart and fix it. So now we're going to move forward to pressing stuff back together. Let's start with the long one. Alright, so I got one reassembled here already, and as it turned out, I didn't need the press to put this all back together. I just lined it up. I got my bearing down here packed real good full of grease. The bottom of the top side of your steering knuckle, there's a little seal that goes in there, so I'll show you when we get on the other side. But as the kingpin's coming down through, you slide the seal on the kingpin and it'll fit up inside its hole down there, which is the spot underneath the bushing that the machine shop left you room for. Now I can finish, ooh, it's dark under there. Now I can finish reassembling my springs and stuff on this side, and well, most all of it, and then with vehicle weight, or rather after I got my springs and stuff in here, I can put a jack underneath the steering knuckle and lift up on it, and then use a feeler gauge to check for the clearance that I'm looking for, which is roughly 8 to 10 thousandths, somewhere in there. Real close. From what I learned on the other side from putting this seal in, it's a lot easier to deal with if you take the kingpin. I don't think you can see what I'm showing you. It's a lot easier to deal with if you slide the kingpin through the top and then put the seal over the kingpin itself. Like so. Now it's held in place for you. And then take the steering knuckle before you mess with that bearing, and see how I've got the kingpin slid down some here. And now I can work the bearing in at the bottom. I'll try to get you in close here so you can see. This is the hole that the pin that holds your kingpin in place in the center, that's the hole that goes through. So now that we've got our lower bearing, the only bearing, and the shim and all that in place, we've driven the kingpin this far down. It's almost in. You're going to look through this hole right here. You might not be able to tell on camera, but it's a lot easier to see in person. You get your eyeballs in there, and you'll see the slot on the kingpin. You'll also need to have that slot facing, the way, but you'll be able to see that slot start coming down. And then you carefully drive it in a little further until you get the slot centered. And now that we have it right in the middle, we can take our pin and it's going to slide through like so. Also, you'll see in this pin that it's round on one side. There's the threaded end. The other end here we're looking at, it's round on one side, and on this side it's got like this chamfered edge cut to it. That edge is the part that you're sliding into that keyway on the Kingpin. And now that we have that reassembled with the amount of shims that I'm pretty sure we're going to need to achieve the clearance we want, we need to continue reassembling our little pedestal mount here. We're going to get this all cleaned up, or the spring mount, get it all cleaned up, mounted back in place, and then we're going to reinstall the spring from the original springs from that truck. Now we've got the rest of our hardware that supports the spring and our other nut and the spring in place. It's hooked up together at the top at that retainer. Now we have our big jack underneath the steering knuckle. We're putting lots of the pressure upwards on it to get all the weight sitting down on this bearing, so we can take a clearance measurement right here, and that's where our little feeler gauges come in. And I just tried through a couple different gauges. Let's see if I can get y'all down here where you can see the little gap in there. This is the 10/1000th feeler gauge, and it fits in nice and easy, but there's a light drag, so it's not got room to wiggle around. So that is a 10/1000th of an inch gap up there, which is right where we want it to be, because we want to be anywhere between like 8, 10, 11, somewhere around there. I believe 15 thousandths is a little big, so that's right where we want to be. So with that in mind, we don't have to pull our caps off, and we don't have to disassemble this guy again, which is actually why I have the caps on it now. So that's set, that's where we want it to be. Now we get to continue reassembling this side. So now I got my dust covers all restored with a can of Rust-Oleum, and those things are really nasty crusty, so we don't really care about how the color looks. We're just trying to cover up the rust a little bit. But now that's back on, and we get to move forward to getting really greasy and repacking our wheel bearings and putting the hub back on. Right there. Right there. Okay. Now we've got the other hub rotor assembly and brake caliper on. Just look at the all-togetherness. Now we're ready to put a wheel on. Finally. Look at all that stuff that's under there that wasn't under there before. Look at us go. Just look at us go. Now we can put a wheel on. Actually, now we can come back over to my 92 and we can pull a few more wheels off, and then we can put those wheels on. Well, that about concludes our big project of fixing up the kingpins and all the other bushings and stuff under there. Now we've got our Kingpin job all sorted. We got the axle pivot guys, bushings in. We've robbed shocks front and rear off of the old 92, so the old 81 truck is sitting up all nice in level, pretty close to like factory ride height, and doesn't ride so bad when you go down the road. And things are looking kind of snazzy under here. Get down and look. Ooh, new fittings. The dust covers are all painted up. Ooh, it was really ugly under here before. Like that, looked like that everywhere. Slowly but surely, we're getting it all fixed up. And the springs we have under the front end here, I told y'all earlier, are the old original springs off the 92 Ford in there. And they're old and wore out also, but because it's a heavier truck than this one is, they work pretty good here. If you'll notice, when you get out in the front with these I-beam suspensions, you really have to have your spring height right. You have to have your ride height good. When the springs get wore out and it sits lower, your I-beams don't sit like they're supposed to. They start angling up, and then your angulation on your front tires is just ruined, and they don't stand straight, and it tears up front tires. But it looks like our springs, our old springs off the other truck that aren't quite as old as the springs that were on this truck, are working out good for us, because gnat in my mouth because the tires are sitting nice and straight, and maybe we'll wear halfway evenly. But yeah, we also went through the rear end of the truck, and I discovered that we're going to have another future video about changing axle bearings and seals in the old 40-year-old 9-inch in the back of this truck. This side, when you pull the tire and the drum off, everything looks great. Everything works good. Got rear brakes, nothing leaking. The other side, we got a nasty axle seal leak, and there's 90 weight from the axle leaking into the brakes over there. So we're going to change both sides out, because as soon as we change the one side next week, this one will be leaking. But yep, that'll be a future video. Till then, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day. Hopefully this was helpful and assisted somebody. Yeah.